Welcome to the ongoing saga of spraying the clear coats onto Type O. I've just done coat number 2. There's nothing amazing about it, but I thought I'd just show you how I've got the suspension of the guitar set up. So it's just going through, the wire is just going through one of the neck screw holes in the body, and I've just got it hooked up to this lever here, so that by turning the lever, I can turn the guitar and spray the other sides. One of the disadvantages of having it hanging, and perhaps it's just a matter of my technique as well, I do tend to possibly spray a little longer than I need to per coat, is that gravity has its way. And you can see there's a little run there, and there are a couple of little runs like that. That's not a disaster. I mean, flat sanding will take care of a lot of that, or hopefully it'll take care of all of that. That is going to be a matter of technique. And with an aerosol can like this, I won't demonstrate because I don't want to waste the stuff, but you don't really have any control over how much comes out, over the flow. Whereas with a spray gun and a compressor, which is what I would like to get one of these days, you do. You can control how much is coming out, and I would dial it back a little bit from what's coming out of there, so I could just give it more of a mist coating. That would increase the number of coats required, but you would get a slightly more even finish, and there would be less work required because there would be fewer of those little defects and whatnot to address later. But it seems to be coming along okay. Right, well, I've had Type O hanging in the drying cupboard for more than a month and a half, quite some time. And it's certainly nice and dry, and it feels, it's hard to tell just by touching it like this, but it feels reasonably hard, as you would hope it to be. There were some, because the very last coating I did was very, very thick, and it ran. So there were some really high spots, some like mountain peaks. There's one there, and there were some hanging off the end. So I took to those with these snips and just cut the tips of those off to, reduce the amount of work that I'm going to have to do. And there were some runs that were standing very proud of the surface as well. So I took a razor blade and just shaved the tops of those off. I may have accidentally gone too far there, but if I find that I have, when it comes to the end, I will, after the rest of the body has been done, just retouch that tiny bit and let it dry, and then come back to that. That shouldn't be too much trouble. Now it's time to flat sand this. I've decided to start with 600 grit. It's possibly too fine, but if you're going to make a mistake, make the mistake of going too fine rather than too coarse, because at least too fine won't do any damage. I like the affirmation that you get when you use water. What I mean by that is, as you are removing clear coat, it comes up as this white sort of paste floating in the water, and you can see that you're doing the job. You'll know this if you've watched any video in the past where I've done the sanding and polishing, or anyone else for that matter, but I'll show you just in case this is your first time. Some of the water is still drying off there. You might look at this and think, gosh, now it's not shiny anymore. And you're right, it's not. Before it was shiny, but it was really uneven. There were highs and lows, which is no good. You want a nice flat finish. So what this stage does, the flat sanding stage, is it sands everything back so that it's no longer shiny, but it's at least perfectly flat, or at least very flat. Then you start to restore the shine by sanding finer and then polishing with compounds so that it's both flat and shiny. I feel like I just described that in a kindergarten voice. I'm sorry, I don't mean to patronize you. That's when you talk down to people. No, that's condescending. There we are. That's what I get for trying to be grandiloquent. So I've sanded, actually I did go down to 400 grit just to really work at those high spots, and that was quite effective. I paid for it slightly, I'll show you what I mean in a moment. So I went 400, then 600. I actually didn't have any 800 other than electric sander pads, and I didn't want to use that. So I went from 600 to 1200, and now I have a nice satin finish. No, more of a matte finish. Maybe satin. It's getting there. Anyway, by the time I've polished it up, it'll be more than that. But possibly because I used the 400, possibly I just rubbed too much in some places. But I've sanded through the clear coats at a couple of points. Well, more than a couple. There and there, there and there, and several little spots on the back. I don't think it's the end of the world. What I'll do is I'll respray that, then I will re-dye those spots and respray them, hang it up to dry, and those spots should be quite smooth because I'm spraying it onto something that is very smooth, and I'm only going to do just over a coat, probably no more than 2 coats certainly on those areas, and then I'll come back and continue. I'll see what further sanding those spots need, and then I'll go down to 2000 grit and the polishing compounds. You can see in some parts of the binding where it's contaminated by a little bit of dye which has gotten onto there as some clear finish has run onto the binding. So I'm just going over the binding first of all, very carefully, sanding back until I reach a point where I can't see any red on there. It's been a long time in the real world since I've had Type O on my bench, and that's simply because I have screwed up the clear coats a couple of times, accidentally sanded through, and so had to retouch with a little more acrylic sprayed on, and then there have been other projects taking my attention away, but I think we're okay now. That is so unwise, isn't it? I think we're great now. So I'm down to 1200 without incident. I'm going to leap, because it's the next finest grit that I have, I'm going to leap straight from here to 2000. I think I'll check what I've got, but I think that's the next finest one that I've got. And then I'll move on to polishing compounds. You can see some of the artifacts of the damage, but those little marks, those little discoloured patches are beneath the top coat. They are protected. They're just maybe they look like wood features. I'll generously say that. I mean, there are other wood features like old nail holes, which I think are really cool. I'm wearing a ring here on my right hand. I've just been careful not to press down with that part of my finger, or it'll make a groove in the surface. Throughout this process of making mistakes and going too far, it's I guess given me an appreciation for just how exacting this process is. Right, as much as I like using power tools like my polisher, restraint is the name of the game. Only do as much as I need to. I don't want to burn through. Applying some cutting compound, which is what I use. Initially, anyway. Looking pretty good. While I'm on a roll, I'll do the other side. as I'm rubbing this up with a soft towel, I'm deciding whether or not to polish further, because I don't have to. This actually looks incredible now. It's not the highest gloss possible. I could keep going and get higher glosses, but I'll show you in just a moment what I can see. Now, I think I will go, because that was cutting compound. I mean, it's much finer than sanding, but it's the coarsest compound I would use. Looks great. I will just go one more round, this time with the cream polish, which is finer still. And there are finer things that you can use, like swirl remover, but actually, when it comes to lines and swirls, this already looks really good. So I'm just going to give it a very brief treatment with that. It'll look exactly the same as what you just saw. So I'll bring you back once I've done that. Well, I like what I'm seeing. So I said I wouldn't get carried away and go through all the different compounds, but the thing is, once you start seeing how good it looks when you do the cutting compound, and that looks pretty good, and you think, should I leave it there? No, I'll put the cream polish on. I'll go all the way, but I won't do any more. And then you realize that that's making it look even better. So I did go ahead and use the scratch and swirl remover, and then I even went further and used the polish and wax, which contains, I never know how to pronounce it. Is it carnauba wax? That stuff, you've probably heard of it, maybe. And I just really like the result. I really, really do. So I'm going to have to look after this now for the rest of the process. I'll finish off the neck next. Yeah, I'll do that. But in the meantime, look, I've always, until now, and still now, considered that wet sanding and polishing a clear finish is my weak point, and it is. There are a couple of flaws with this, which I'm not really showing you, just because, well, why would I? I can feel that I've started to wear through just on the binding, so not over the wood. You would only know that if you were looking for it. I will disclose it to anyone who wishes to buy this. And there is a patch on the back here, which has been a problem ever since I started respraying it. It's a slightly discolored patch, which seems difficult to build up a number of clear coats on. And I've rubbed a very small bare patch there. I'm not going to go back and redo that. I'm just not. Because even if I did, even if I roughed up that area slightly and resprayed it, that would still be discolored, and I'm not really sure why. And I'm not going to do a much larger repair job than that to make it look right. So I'll simply tell whoever buys this, there's a little bare patch there, and there's a tiny bare patch over here on the binding. So sue me. I think it looks really nice. Good. Good. I'm glad the holes were in the right position so that the studs would hold the bridge properly. I am a real fan of wraparound bridges which don't have a separate tailpiece. This object serves as both the tailpiece holding the end of the string and the bridge holding the saddles. Yeah. Check it out. P.S. I have decided to go back and fix that little bare patch on the back. It wasn't a huge deal, but it wasn't right. So, there we are. It adds time to the project, but I do think it's worth doing. Until next time.